Good afternoon, everybody. Talking about bringing kids up. Long time ago, we used to have the use of a house in Rossnowla. And when I was in the inner city, then we brought some kids up regularly at weekends. So we brought this group of kids up anyway. And they went out in the middle of the night and they robbed a little sweet shop, which was down at the end of the road. And the next morning, about 7 o'clock, the guards arrived and wanted to search the place. And the kids were in absolute awe and admiration. How did the guards know it was us? So I stopped bringing them to sweet shop here. Anyway, I'm sure you'll agree that was one of the best mornings I've had, I must say, and for a long time. It was great to hear people calling a spade, basically. And unfortunately, and perhaps this is part of the problem, the gardeners weren't here to listen. Probably too busy doing something else, but it really was such an important morning. I think all our government ministers should be forced to watch that webcam of this morning's speech. The morning was so good that I'd have to say you can't expect both an excellent morning and an excellent afternoon. So I'm off the hook. Anyway, in early 2009, NESC described the crisis facing the country as having 5 distinct but tightly tied together dimensions that Ed Malloy mentioned: a banking crisis, a public finance crisis, an economically and specifically a competitiveness crisis, a social crisis, and a reputational crisis. And Ed this morning added the 6th crisis, the culture of the old wineskins, and this culture largely responsible for the implementation gap, the failure to adequately react to the plethora of reports, analysis, and investigations which we're very good at producing. I'd like just to add a 7th crisis, which I believe underlies all these other crises, namely a crisis of values. One of my persistent criticisms of the Celtic Tiger was that we were so busy making and spending money that we ignored the values which the Celtic Tiger was embedding in our society, and values which, in my view, are in direct contradiction to the values which I would like to see in my republic. One of the things that dismays me also these days is that so many people seem to be hoping to restore the economy as soon as possible to where we were before the crash. In my view, the economic model that we embraced so enthusiastically was fundamentally flawed. We should not want to go back there. We do not need to go back there. So to describe the republic that I'd like to see, I'm going to begin first by outlining what I see were the values that were embedded in the economic model which gave us the Celtic Tiger, and then to outline the values which I would like to see the republic I would want to uphold. 2 fundamental fatal flaws, economic flaws in that economic model. The first was the economic model that gave us the Celtic Tiger was incapable, both at home and globally, of giving everyone a decent standard of living. At home, while many of us came to experience a lifestyle way beyond anything our parents could have dreamt of, others remained locked in poverty, homelessness, and hopelessness. During the 10 or 12 years of the Celtic Tiger, the number of homeless people in this country doubled from 2,500 in 1996 to over 5,000 in 2008. The number of households on social housing waiting lists more than doubled from 27,400 in 1996 to 56,240 in 2008. Our prisons became more overcrowded than ever before in the history of our state. In 2008, 1 child in 9 still remained in this country in consistent poverty. And thousands of poor families and homeless people continued to live in slum conditions in private rented accommodation which is unfit for human habitation. Globally, the economic model we have known has given millions of us in the Western world a standard of living which fulfilled all our dreams, but it cannot lift the billion people in our world who still live on the edge of destitution. It cannot lift them out of poverty without destroying our planet with greenhouse gases and polluting our water sources to the point of being unusable. So the first fundamental flaw in that model, as I see it, was that it was not accessible to everybody. The second fundamental and fatal flaw in that model was that it was unsustainable. It depended on us buying more and more to keep the economy going. But the money was limited, and to an unsustainable degree it was borrowed, and the planet's resources are finite, so the bubble eventually had to burst. That economic model was based on a belief in infinite growth capitalism, the myth that a consumption-led economy can keep on growing indefinitely. Someone described the Celtic Tiger as a time when we were buying things we did not need, with money we did not have, using resources we cannot renew. And so an unending consumption-led capitalism must either implode or destroy the planet. So we're now left with a planet that needs urgent healing and a debt that will sink many households and endangers our country's economic and social future. But the economic model that we pursued was not, and that blew up in our face, was not just fatally flawed economically, it was also fatally flawed morally. That model had as its overriding objective the pursuit of maximum profit for one sector of the economy, namely shareholders in the banking and business corporate world. Everybody else was simply a means to that end. Employees had no value in themselves. Their value was dependent on their ability to create profits for shareholders. When they were no longer needed, in other words, when more profits could be made for shareholders without them, then the employees were expendable. As per Dell, who simply relocated, 2,000 employees, many of whom had given a long period of their life to the company, simply laid off. As per Irish Ferries, where Irish workers were laid off and replaced immediately by workers from Eastern Europe who were willing to work for less wages in harsher conditions. As per Hibernian and others who simply upped and moved to lower cost countries, in the process discarding workers, some of whom had given long service to the company. Nor did customers of any value, beyond making profits for the shareholders. Some low-cost airlines show near contempt for their passengers, except insofar as they are a source generating money for the company. Some large international retailers failed to pass on the euro-sterling difference when the euro was strengthening, because they believed they could extract more money from their customers. Some banks appear to almost resent having to deal with customers face to face. Suppliers are in many instances treated by large supermarkets as if they were just fodder for that company's profits. So in the pursuit of maximum profits for shareholders, the key stakeholders pursued for themselves the goal of maximum personal gain, as evidenced by revelations of obscene salaries, bonuses, expenses, pensions, golden handshakes, and exceptional payments. In such an economic system, the basic inequality is not the inequality of wealth, but the inequality of power. Those who have the power can accumulate to themselves a disproportionate share of the wealth created, and can use that power and that wealth to influence public policy to suit their own interests. Those who have the skills that are needed by the economy or by the population at large can make excessive demands on the wealth created. Thus, company directors, lawyers, other professionals whose skills are needed for the functioning of the economy can demand obscene payments. Hospital consultants whose skills are necessary for the health of the population can demand excessive salaries, although it might be argued that others are far more important to the health of the nation, such as refuse collectors. But their skills, unfortunately for them, are not confined to a select few. Thus, an economic system which was driven by the desire to benefit one sector of the population, devaluing everyone else in the process, allowed those who had the power to derail or sabotage that system to make exorbitant demands on the wealth which everybody, shareholders, employees, customers, producers and suppliers, all contributed to creating. Such a system had within it the seeds of its own destruction. In fact, the economic model in which we were so successfully implanted had exactly the same moral flaw as that which caused communism to implode. Communism sought to remedy legitimate grievances concerning the way society was organized and the economic model which underpinned that society. But its failure to respect the value of each individual, seeing them instead only as a cog in the collective machine, led to the political crisis which caused communism to eventually collapse. The dominant economic model of the past few decades equally fails to respect the value of each individual in society, seeing them only as a source of profit for shareholders. Of course, there are companies, company directors who do try to treat customers and employees with the dignity which is their right. But the economic model we have adopted creates huge ethical problems for such individuals, as their concern may place their companies at a competitive disadvantage within the system, and they may have to struggle with their consciences and almost certainly lose. What were the values then that such an economic model promoted? The first was clearly an excessive individualism. It was everyone for himself or herself. The subtle but clear message was, the economy is booming, get in there and get what you can. Nobody else is going to do it for you. Indeed, everyone else is a potential competitor and therefore a potential threat. A sort of Darwinian survival of the fittest. If you failed to participate in this economy and benefit from the wealth it was creating, and some got very left behind and felt very excluded and unvalued, it was your own fault. Sure, hundreds of thousands of non-Irish were pouring into the country to take up many of the additional jobs that became available. Thousands of FOSS courses were available if you needed upskilling. So if you remained unemployed, you needn't be looking for any sympathy. Now, we haven't time now to analyse the flaws in that perspective. But government policy reinforced this value, particularly under Minister for Finance Charlie McCreevy. He's come in for a bit of a hammering today. But particularly under him, where those outside the workforce benefited little from successive budgets. While Brian Cowen showed considerably more compassion as Minister for Finance, he fundamentally pursued the same policies. This excessive individualism weakened, sometimes to the point of disintegration, the sense of community. Community involvement became an optional extra for those who felt so inclined, a sideshow to the real business of making and enjoying wealth. Second value that this economic model promoted was to persuade us that our happiness and fulfilment was to be found in consuming goods and services. To keep the economy going, everybody had to be persuaded to buy more and more and more often. But as our real needs are limited, What we purchased and consumed had less and less relationship to what we actually needed. Hence, a consumer-led economic model had to convince us to want more and more by persuading us that there we found our fulfillment and our happiness. When I was growing up, we got a 14-inch black and white TV. The very rich had a 17-inch black and white TV. A few years later, I went to visit relatives in England, and I saw a football match on their 17-inch colour TV. I couldn't wait till we got a colour TV. How could you possibly enjoy watching a football match in black and white? Then the TV screens got bigger and bigger. Then everyone had to have flat screen TVs. Then we were persuaded that to watch sports or documentaries, you had to have high definition TVs. In the next few years, we will be made to feel that we cannot do without three-dimensional TVs. More is better was the mantra of that economic model, with its variations such as bigger is better or newer is better. It sought therefore to persuade us that our needs are infinite and that they could be fulfilled independently of other people. It sought furthermore to promote the belief that everyone's value is dependent on their contribution to the economy. I'm struck frequently by people who 12 months ago were in good jobs, were made redundant and had to sign on the dole. And the constant theme that they talk about is how their sense of their own value and their own self-esteem takes a plummeting. They feel degraded going into the dole office, and they feel treated in a very degrading manner in the dole office. People's value came to depend on their contribution to the economy and therefore on their willingness and ability to purchase more and bigger and newer. We see that also in the deference that we have to people in authority. It was wonderfully refreshing this morning to hear people just call a spade and to criticise those in authority, because we tend not to do that, at least not to do that too publicly or not to do that too much to their face. And as two of the speakers said, that when they did criticise, their jobs were on the line. Third value was to ensure the continued expansion of the economic system. We had to be persuaded that our security is to be found in what we possess. We had to work hard within the system in order to obtain more so that we could cushion ourselves and our families from the uncertainties of the future. Purchasing our own home, building up a bank balance, expanding our shareholdings, buying a second home, maybe even a third in a sunny climate, were essential to escape from the insecurity with which the future threatened us. We had to protect. We now know, and many people now know to their cost, that that was a total mirage. But we had to protect at all costs, therefore, what we had acquired, because they were seen to be our security. So those who were different, who were not one of us, had to be kept out. Or at least we had to control who we let into our space, or they would jeopardize our security. Above all, they might jeopardize the value of our home. Not even affordable housing, still less social housing, was acceptable in our private estates. All this was seen as essential for the security of our children. But as the goods and services of this world are limited, then the race to find security in economic terms pushes us into a competitive struggle with other human beings who become not the source of our fulfillment, but a threat to that fulfillment. What are the values of a new economic model that I would like to see? The dominant values would be, first, a sense of solidarity, a strong sense of and commitment to community instead of an excessive individualism. It is in community that we find our security, not in our possessions. It is in the solidarity of a community which will support us in our bad times and to which we can contribute in our good times. It is in that sense of solidarity with the community that we find our security. Second value, inclusiveness. It must be a society in which everybody can participate and feel valued, in which people don't feel excluded and unwanted, in which people don't feel they have no future here, they have to emigrate. Third value would be living well but simply, instead of an endless and restless pursuit of yet higher and higher living standards. Such a pursuit can never be successful. We always become dissatisfied with what we have. And indeed, the whole economic model depends on us becoming dissatisfied with what we have, so that we go out and purchase more, go out and purchase bigger, go out and purchase newer. Fourth value would be a strong concern for others, particularly the more vulnerable, instead of the self-interest that came to dominate our society during the Celtic Tiger. The failure of developing that sense of solidarity and allowing that self-interest to dominate now threatens our future, because at a time when we need solidarity and we need everyone to shoulder their fair share of the pain that's involved, everybody is rushing to protect their own self-interest. And of course, those who have the wealth and the power to protect their own self-interest are clearly those who have benefited most from the Celtic Tiger. It is the vulnerable and the poor whose interests are not being defended. And the fifth value that I would like to see in an economy would be sustainability. A society that respects our God-given planet and recognizes our obligation to provide security for future generations. So the question then I would ask is, how can we build an economic model that has the above values embedded in it? An economic model based on the myth of infinite growth capitalism must give way to an economic model based on limited but sustainable growth. And some of the speakers this morning mentioned that this mad drive for expanding the economy as fast as we could was not in our interests. We must consider seriously the limits of growth, and we must search for sustainable models of growth. The mantra of the old economic model, more is better, must give way to a new mantra, moderation with restraint. We can return to full employment, but not at the standard of living which was available to some of us during the Celtic Tiger years. We can give all those living in poverty, both at home and abroad, a decent quality of life, but not while some of us enjoy the standard of living which we had come to take for granted. The ethical base of such a model must not just be identified with stricter regulation nor with rule compliance. How often have we heard bankers justify what they did by saying they had done nothing illegal, that there was no impropriety involved in their actions? The ethics of a new model must be based on the inherent value of each individual, and must involve not only a more just sharing of the wealth created, but a more just sharing of the power which accompanies the accumulation of wealth. Of course, for the economy to revive, there must be a real demand for new goods and services, a demand that will create investment opportunities, but not a demand for superfluous goods and services like Gucci handbags and shopping trips to New York, which create an economy which primarily benefits a few. No, the goods and services that can create a new demand, which can fuel a new economic model, must be goods and services that are necessary and enduring, goods and services which can lift everyone out of poverty and marginalisation. Where the old economic model emphasised the individual, the new economic model must ensure that everyone benefits. It must therefore be built on the value of solidarity. Perhaps the only times in history when such solidarity existed within and between nations were those times when a war was waged or threatened. At such times there was a common purpose, a common commitment, and a universal willingness to sacrifice self-interest for the common good. Today, to move into a new era, an era that promises a better life for all, and a real hope for a better future, we need a new war. Not against Iran or North Korea, but against poverty, ecological destruction and climate change. A war on poverty, both at home and abroad, would create a demand for investment in meeting the basic needs of all: food, housing, health services, education, and the public infrastructure for economic and social development. It would build a society in which the special needs of children are met, in which homeless people are housed, in which travellers are welcomed, in which prisons are places of rehabilitation. A war on climate change would create a demand for non-fossil fuel transport, for clean energy, for public transport. Where would the money come from to pay for such a war? As with all wars, the money is found by sharing what we have. Such a war requires a solidarity that unfortunately exists in only a very weakened state in Ireland, or indeed elsewhere. It was almost destroyed by the Celtic Tiger. It requires a sacrifice of self-interested short-term gains, which means on the national level a willingness to put the poor and future generations in first place, and at the international level a willingness to dismantle barriers to free trade set up by rich countries to protect their own interests, to dismantle barriers to the free movement of labour with the same enthusiasm as the barriers to the free movement of capital were dismantled, and to pursue the Millennium Development Goals. Such an economic model considers justice, compassion, community, and ecological responsibility as points of departure for economic life, not as mere afterthoughts. Such an economic model will seriously reduce the living standards of most of us in Ireland and in the economically developed world. But it will allow those now living in poverty, both at home and abroad, to find a better quality of life. And it will bequeath the world a world to future generations that they can actually live in. Such a vision is anathema to the vision which the Celtic Tiger so successfully built. Solidarity instead of individuality, putting others first instead of satisfying one's own self-interest, living simply instead of an endless pursuit of yet higher and higher living standards. Christianity, when it is lived properly, if it is ever lived properly, can be a powerful force in terms of shifting a culture to a vision and values that are subversive of a complacent status quo. In that Christian vision, we are stewards of the earth, not masters who can do what we want. We are all brothers and sisters, not individuals competing for scarce resources. In that vision, we find our security in our togetherness in community, not in accumulating material goods. In that vision, we find our happiness in giving, not in getting. We recognize that people do not exist to serve the economy, but the economy exists to serve human beings, all human beings. Such an economic model may seem like an unrealizable pipe dream, but it is actually essential for the survival of the planet. To continue with the same old model, with the same values, will destroy the human race, either through the destruction of the planet or through unresolvable social conflict. We cannot build a new economic model on an old political model. Much has been written since the crisis began about the inadequacies of our political model, its role in the creation of the crisis, and its inability to lead us through the crisis. That's what we heard all about this morning. A transformed economic model requires a transformed political model and a transformation of leadership. Political leadership which does not bow to powerful vested interests, which does not seek its own good at the expense of the good of others, which is not self-serving but seeks to serve the common good, and which gives rightful place to other values beyond mere economic growth. Values such as solidarity, community, and respect for others. Such a transformed political leadership seeks to build security for our country and for our world, not through unsustainable economic growth, but through building sustainable communities. The Christian vision has, in my view, a major contribution to make. Not just to the building of a fair and just world, but to the very survival of the world. Those of us who call ourselves Christian cannot continue to prop up the status quo, seduced by the comfortable lifestyle which the old economic model has made available to us, but which is not available to tens of thousands of others at home and a billion others abroad, and will not be available to future generations. Such questioning of the economic model will ensure ridicule, contempt, and opposition from people who are respectable and respected, who have too much to lose. We should welcome that. Thank you very much.